advice for HR and people leaders. I'm Martha Ogunsakin, your host for today. I'm a communications executive at Westfield Health, and we're joined today by three brilliant guests. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Pinches. I'm head of coaching here at Westfield Health, background in psychology and a lot of experience looking at change and helping people sort of transform through change into something different. So yeah, lovely to be part of the process today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Irene Keel. I'm a director at Sylvester Keel, and it's a business that specialises in the design and install of professional kitchens for care homes, hospitals and education sectors.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Really lovely to be here. I'm Vicky Walker. I'm the Chief People Officer for the Westfield Health Group. And Westfield look after corporate health and wellbeing and corporate cash plans too.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us today. So before we hear more from our panel, I'll just go through some housekeeping points. So the webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a recording shortly afterwards by email. And you've joined in listen-only mode, so no one can see or hear you. You can ask our panel's questions using the question box you'll see on your screen, and we love hearing from you, so we'll try and answer as many as we can. And you'll see a handout that you can download in the materials section, and during the webinar, we'll be taking polls to include our audience members in the experience. So the polls are completely anonymous and optional, but we will share the overall results. At the end as well, a survey will appear on your screens, and it would be great if you could give your feedback, as this helps us shape future webinars. So we'll get into it. So organizations are constantly navigating change, and this could be changes in technology, organization restructures, changes to priorities, adapting to new ways of working, or even personnel changes within teams. So today we'll be focusing on how change and the ways it's managed can affect employee well-being. So what we'll discuss will be the psychological impact of change, how employees react differently to change, how to reduce uncertainty that employees may feel, and advice for communicating effectively and keeping employees engaged during periods of change. We'll have time at the end as well to answer some questions from the audience, so please feel free to make use of the question box. So let's kick off with a poll that we'd like our audience to take part in. And we're interested to know, how confident do you feel about your organization's ability to manage change well? Just give a bit of time for the audience to put their answers in.
Oh, it's great. So many people are answering. This is great.
Yeah, I can see a few different answers here, a few different levels of confidence.
Seems to be one that's consistently in the lead.
Yes. That's quite reassuring, actually, that people feel that it could be improved rather than really unconfident. So
yeah,
absolutely. Always scope to move onwards and upwards.
Yes. So to start us off, Mark, what do we mean by the psychological impact of change, and why does this actually matter for HR leaders to understand this?
Okay, well, look, change has very much come on the radar now with regard to how we're looking at well-being in the workplace, which is rapidly changing. It's always changed, but it's faster now than it's ever been. What it's going to do is make us feel slightly uncomfortable. Uncertainty and not quite knowing how that change is going to sort of pan out is going to activate our natural stress response. And what we mean by that is to put us into fight or flight. And it's a very natural mechanism to allow us to be able to prepare to deal with the threat. But the problem is that we try to come down into a sort of a more calm state to be able to be more creative and think of the ways that we can actually move through those threats and those impending changes and what they might mean to us. But look, the pace of change is happening very quickly, and we haven't got time to slow down and use those creative centers of the brain. So what we try to do naturally is create almost like a sort of a common ground. It's a pattern that feels familiar to us. So we're a pattern-making being, and the whole idea is that when we've got a pattern and something that we can recognize, we latch onto it. So someone's going to come along and say to us, look, here's a new pattern for you to adopt, we're going to actually start to resist it. It's a natural thing to resist and try and create a degree of stability or homeostasis, as the human body would want to do. But the problem is with that is that when something has to change, we're going to dig our heels in and we're going to make it very difficult for ourselves to go along with it. Most of the time we have to go along with it. The danger is that we become prisoners of familiarity. We stick doing the same thing, we dig our heels in, and then we get left behind. So what we need to do is make people feel more relaxed about the change process. The idea is that if we see it in a slightly different way, and maybe even change the word to something which is more to do with a transformation, that's something that's positive, the idea is that those psychological changes will be something that we'll welcome if we think we're growing. So if we look at the disadvantage of sticking the heels in, the danger is that we will show the signs and symptoms of fight or flight. And that will be that we'll use up our more energy than we need. We'll put ourselves into what we might call adrenal overload. So we'll produce more cortisol, we'll produce more adrenaline, we'll get tired, and we'll resist more. So it becomes, if you like, a bit of a sort of vicious circle. But there's merit in moving onwards and upwards, and I hope we can reassure you that really today. There's a thing called a sigmoid curve, which is interesting. We might see a picture of it in a moment, which is the idea of things come along and have a lifespan. And if we hang on to that thing, which is, if you like, how we used to do it, we've always done it this way, then the danger is that everything else is growing around us. So we move onwards and upwards, we stop, we find our comfort zone, and actually that change that is going to be to do with how society is moving on, doubt, uncertainty, suggests that if we don't move with it, we're going to move down, and as the curve suggests, on to point B. How do we move on to the next curve? What do we need to do in order to take, if you like, that learning curve with us and go beyond the point that we would have done if we'd have just stayed on the same curve? Well, we've got to buy into it. We've got to feel good about it. So it's all about jumping onto that new curve because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel like we're growing.
I think to your point there, Mark, I think it's really important, isn't it, to recognise that emotional side of change and not just operational and what we want to get done within a business. It's how the impact of that change impacts our colleagues and in emotions, not just what they do. And I think that acknowledgement there around you saying everyone experiences change differently. Someone will see it as positive and transformational. Some people will be scared by it. So I think recognising that one size doesn't fit all approach isn't good, and you really need to know your colleagues. And I think recognising these sort of responses quite early and try and normalise them for people and say it's okay to feel apprehensive or it's okay to feel excited. So I think sort of calling those responses out early and normalising them is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a good point, Vicky, just saying about the emotional response. I think people who score highly on what would be emotional quotient, or EQ, actually respond to change much better. And if you score highly on your EQ, what it means is that you actually understand that there are emotions, good or not so good, that actually will be something we can learn from. So EQ and emotional quotient is important when we're under threat to understand how we respond. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
That's fantastic, and it's great to kind of see it visually represented with that graph that you showed there as well, Mark. Thank you. So Irene, why do people react so differently to change, and what factors do you think influence those reactions?
I think quite often it's personality traits with various people in many different ways. I mean, you've got the resilience element, which can be for a number of reasons. It can be past experiences. We all know if we have a positive experience with something, we feel great about ourselves and it encourages us to want to do more of it. If we've had a negative experience, it can make us feel closed, not open to change. So that's quite critical, I believe. And you've also got a perceived control as well. So if you feel in control of something, you feel really great. If you're not in control, you feel powerless. And that's when the barriers come up, and that's when you see a massive resistance to change. But also, I think a lot of it is about organizational culture as well, depending on how your organization operates. If you embrace innovation and collaboration, I think you've then you create a culture where people can handle change better rather than being resistant to it. So that's just a few traits. I mean, there's many, as we all well know, but just to touch upon a few, that's kind of my perception of it.
Thank you. It's very insightful. Mark, if you could just briefly talk us through the stages of the Kubler-Ross change model.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, what you talked about there, Irene, was absolutely right, to look at it in an organizational level, and I'm sure that's how most people are actually thinking about that today. What does it mean for my responsibility, for me and the organization itself? But the organization's made up of people, of course, and we all have an individual response to change. And this Kubler-Ross change curve has been around for quite a long time. I'm sure people have seen it before, but essentially we go through a number of phases when something's presented to us that might take us out from that comfort zone, or that pattern that we're familiar with. So the idea is, in the early stages, I've got my pattern, oh, I don't like this, and we'll go into almost like a denial phase that says, maybe it'll go away, maybe it won't happen. And it's an immediate sort of threat, if you like, to that stability, that balance, that homeostasis, that equilibrium that the body tries to go for. And then we find ways that it might affect us in terms of what this means for me. It's going to change the way that I'm now going to move forward, and it develops a degree of anxiety because we think the worst. We think the uncertainty will create, something which will, potentially be worse. We catastrophize, and we get angry about it. But there's a point when that is going to have an impact on our natural emotions, on our well-being, and this is why it's such a relevant sort of topic for us, and why we're so passionate about making sure people feel good about the whole process of change. There's a point when we have to bounce off the bottom of it and say, look, I know it's affecting me, but I can't change the fact that there's change. And there's an acceptance, almost like this is going to happen. How now can it be good for me? What can I see as a positive now? Everyone's going to go through that curve, and I think the aim really is to go through it as quick as possible. We will have an immediate, oh, it might not happen to me, but when it does happen, acceptance quickly and going through those phases will allow us to have that acceptance that will sort of move forward in a way to us jumping onto that new sigmoid curve. Lots of curves here today, but that's the Kubler-Ross model, and it works for everybody. It's just getting through it quickly, really. That's the aim. Yeah.
Thank you. So before we move on to practical advice, we're just going to launch our second poll, as we're keen to understand, what's the biggest challenge you face when supporting employees through change?
I think the options here on the poll are really interesting, aren't they, in terms of all the different things that it could be, the challenges.
Yeah, you can already see which one's taking the lead here.
Yeah, well, look at that, managing the resistance from some employees. You see, this is the digging the heels in, isn't it? This is where I like my pattern. I don't want anything to change it. And a lot of people saying, well, as someone responsible for others, it's that resistance which we've got to overcome. And there's lots of very practical things we can do, of course, to reduce the resistance. But, I'm not surprised, actually, that it's that digging the heels in which scores pretty highly there. Yeah, absolutely.
Is it digging heels, or as we say as well, burying the head? If we ignore that change, it might go away. If I ignore it, it's burying the head.
Yeah, it's getting stuck on that denial phase of the Kubler-Ross curve, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you guys for participating in that poll. So uncertainty and change can often lead or cause people to feel stressed. So what are some practical ways that leaders can reduce this stress for their employees?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think, and going back to the results on the poll there, in terms of obviously the leader of that being around the resistance. And I think Ari mentioned earlier around that sense of not having control. And I think what can you do to give some practicality to some colleagues whilst you're going through change? So I think even if you can't tell them everything, I think provide as much information as you can, or at least regular consistent updates, even if you've not got all the details. I think keeping people informed, because when people feel a sense of not control or they're scared, more information helps people feel a little bit more involved and in control. So I think people just like to know information. I think human beings, naturally, we're curious, aren't we? So we like to know things. So even if you can't share everything, I think sharing some details with colleagues is better than nothing. And I think whenever you do that communication, for me, it's about being really clear about what's changing and what isn't as well. Most importantly, that will give some sense of comfort that it's not everything that's changing. So being clear about what is and what isn't changing, I think, is important. I think, we often leave our managers to face colleagues when things are happening and things are changing. So make sure your managers are well equipped with frequently asked questions or a toolkit or something, so that you can at least support their colleagues through the change. And I think as well, try and keep people anchored with the small consistencies that aren't going to change. So, whether it's the regular check-ins that you would normally have, whether it's always a ritual on a Friday to do certain things, keep those things in the diary. Don't lose the routine that you would normally give them. And I think involve employees exactly when you can around feedback or co-creation, so that they feel a little bit more in control of that change. I don't know, Irene, I mean, that was going back to your point, but I think maybe you've got some examples about your employees and what you did to be able to share that later with the audience.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I'd like to give some people will feel that probably what I'm going to mention is nothing new, and other people hopefully might give them food for thought. We've coming out, particularly in COVID, not that we like to go back to those days, but in COVID, particularly in the early stages, we were very open with our staff. We kept in touch with them, and I think people, they value you more that you're open with them and they understand what's happening and when it's happening. And I think if you have that openness with them, they respect you more for that. And then following on from that, they're more agile. We adopted an agile way of working coming out of COVID as well, which is a way of working where you might decide to do something a certain way, and then through no reason of your own, you have to change. And that's about being agile. You have to move, as we call it, move the cheese. If anybody's read that book, you have to move the cheese to be, right at that moment in time. And I think if your staff can understand that's how you're thinking, they're going to embrace the change better. And something else that we've had massive success with is like an overview of management in a way of a 360, where you let your staff be open and honest about what they think about your senior leaders. You put all the suggestions into a box, you pull them out, you decide which ones you're going to share and which ones you're not going to share, because some might be very, very open, some not so. But it's really good, and I think it empowers your team to feel like they can have their say, and I think that is huge. And it's worked for us in our organisation. So if that's anything I could say for you to take away anybody, it really does work, that.
Yeah, I mean, very much about communication. I mean, I came across a statistic a few years ago. Somebody said 96% of issues and problems in organisations are to do with lack of or bad communication, which sort of means that 96% of solutions are to do with improving communication and opening up. And there's two parts of communication. Of course, there's the listening and there's the sending information out. And I think it's a really good point there you mentioned about sort of getting people to be part of that change process. I've run a number of programs in the past where, and it's sort of taken off the back of a lot of the sort of quality improvement and initiatives, where you ask people what improvements and changes take place, and little bite-sized changes add up to a big change. Somebody's always got an idea on their own job. If you ask people, for example, to say, well, we need to have a change here, but hey, I'll ask you a question. How do you think we could save £150,000 this year? And you're not going to get a lot of answers. But if you ask one person to say, can you make a little change in your job? Can you do something that you know about and you're an expert in, because you probably know your job better than anyone else's? They'll probably say yes. But if you've got a high level of participation, the cumulative effect there is lots of little changes add up to a transition or a transformation into something which is meaningful. But you have to ask them in the first place, and of course you have to listen, put it all into a pot. I think a typical, let's save a huge amount of money, well, let's face it, most change initiatives are looking at saving money at the end of the day. If you wanted to make a change, and we ran a program called QED, which was actually in our program stood for quid each day. We asked people just to save a quid each day in their job. We got 90% participation. Ask people how to save £1 million, and you'll get 5% participation, and we'll be having a lot of good ideas in there. So I think this idea stems back to a lot of the business sort of philosophy and ideas which have been put well into practice, like Kaizen. Kaizen, continuous, an ongoing improvement. I mean, I looked quite closely a few years ago at Sony, who were, looking at this process. Sony had 200 changes every day on the way that they produced the Sony Walkman. Why? Because people were always open to new and different ways to do things. And we were asking people in quality circles, and that went on to the Japanese automotive industry. And now we've adopted Kaizen as an ongoing principle. And I think we just need to ask people and realize that change, when people feel part of it, those changes will be forthcoming in terms of suggestions. But if we don't listen, if we don't put it into practice, if we just say we don't really need anybody's input here with the change, what we'll do is we'll have a dedicated department who sits up there who will think of change, and then we'll impose it on you when we put it in place. You're going to catch people unawares, and they're going to dig those heels in even more. So, I think it's about, and I like the term you use, Vicky, that the co-creation. How can we get people to be part of the change? And that's to come, with a broad aim of what we want to achieve here is this change, or as I said, probably transformation is a better word, and allow people to come up with ideas and suggestions. And you never know, they might take ownership of it, and some of the things that might happen might be fantastic. But if we don't ask them, we don't know. So ownership and little wins, definitely, yeah.
Fantastic. Very valuable perspectives there. Seems like communication's a big one, and just involving employees in that change initiative is the way to go about it. So moving on to how to communicate effectively and keep employees engaged during times of change. What does good communication look like? And what are some common mistakes that leaders could make when communicating about change?
Yeah. Well, look, to take that on a bit further, from my point of view, I mean this in the nicest way, that we're not being dishonest, but honest, open communication builds trust. And the idea is that if we're going to do this because we sort of think it will be good for us in the future, but there's an ulterior motive, I'll tell you what, people will find out the ulterior motive. The idea is that if we have an acceptance of something that moves us all as an organization forward, and this becomes a cultural thing, we're an open, transparent organization, it's only really relating to what the values and the mission of the organization is about. Normally, those values that we write down in our organization, when we go in through the foyer at the front, we see the values written down. There's a lot to do in there with communication. So I think open and honesty. I think it's about getting people to understand what roles they play as well. So, I mean, you might find someone on a production line, or someone says, well, look, I don't really know and have any contribution to change because I don't really know what happens up there, in the higher echelons, but everybody is part of it. So I think it's inclusion in that communication process as well. The leaders can control, where the direction of the organization goes, but everybody's going to be part of making that thing move forward. And if we can move up onto that next curve, if you like, as a group, as a coalition of a team, I think it's a much more easier transition to go through that Kubler-Ross curve. It's interesting that if you look at someone like John Cotter, who's done a huge amount of work on change, and his principles have been around for a long time, he's got an 8-step plan. And one of the first things he suggests in his plan is to form a guiding coalition. This is a diagonal cross-section of people through the organization where you have a contribution at every level. And it's amazing how many people come up with some great ideas that we wouldn't have even thought of, or known about rather, if we'd only had a top-down approach. So I think there needs to be this sort of diagonal cross-section of people who are part of it. And I loved his term, guiding coalition. It's like the champions, and a good champion in terms of an organization like wellbeing or something will be something from someone from every single level. I think the other thing about it is timely. I feel that maybe we don't want to worry our employees. Maybe we'll think about what we're going to do for the change, and then we'll tell them, at the last moment, so that they can sort of not be affected and worry about it for too long. And that strategy has failed many times because people like to know in a timely fashion. So if we, as an organization, have a change in strategic direction, or whatever that might be, has been decided at board level or higher levels, let's tell people as soon as possible. Because I tell you what will happen if you don't tell people is they'll fill in the gaps, and they'll normally fill in the gaps with the negative stuff rather than the positive stuff, and you will get an underlying sort of negativity, which is in many respects fueled what people view about change anyway, because we see change as negative. We see change as something that's going to take something away from us. But wouldn't it be wonderful in an organization if we could get a culture where we can't wait for change? We look forward to it because we know we all move onwards and upwards and we feel better for it. Well, it's not such a huge stretch to do that. I mean, certainly from the Japanese philosophy that I explained earlier on, people look forward to those changes because they're a chance for growth and optimism. So I think it's about timing the communication process, and I think it's about being transparent, and I think it's also about listening, because that's the second part. The 2 ears and 1 mouth, let's use them in that proportion. It's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's
I love that analogy, Mark. I think that it's so true, isn't it? And I think also go back to your other part there around the colleagues' breadth from being on a shop floor, factory floor, to high up in the boardroom. I think thinking about how you communicate is really important. Thinking about your individuals and what they actually need. So don't just assume they need written communication. Some may prefer digital communication, and we absorb information in different ways. So thinking about that, utilising different channels, I think is really important. And I also think when you communicate, it's not just about why the business needs that change. Everybody, as soon as that's announced, will be thinking, what does this mean for me? What about me? So I think it's then making sure with any communication, you don't just talk about the impact it has on the business, but also relate to what it means for your colleagues as individuals as well. And I think, as you said, the 2 ears, 1 mouth, create opportunities for dialogue. People like to talk. We're human beings. We love to talk. And I think, opportunities for dialogue, whether it's town halls, whether it's Q&A sessions, whether it's anonymous feedback. So having the opportunity to do that, I think is absolutely key as well. Irene, I don't know if you've got any more thoughts. I mean, the only thing I was thinking around not making assumptions about where people are in their change journey. We'd love everyone to be on a certain part of the curve at the same time, but it doesn't happen like that. Unfortunately, human beings, we're all being in different parts on that change journey as we go along. So I suppose avoid those assumptions when you do communicate. But Irene,
absolutely. I have. I mean, absolutely being open with the team is critical, because often sort of a lack of clarity in change can be a huge challenge in many businesses. And I think if you can just simply talk about things and be open to a certain level, of course, I just think it breaks down those barriers. We've always worked with a mindset of a sort of a you said we did kind of mindset. So we listen to the staff. And one massive thing that's been really great for us in our organisation has been one-to-ones. I'm such an advocate for them because they're so powerful, and you've got to find the right questions. And I believe that we've captured our questions amazingly, and it really breaks down the barriers with the people, and it empowers them to tell you what they think. But that is the important bit. But the most important thing is to do it. Don't say it, do it. So it's a you said, we did kind of mindset, and that really, really can work and be very, very powerful.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Irene. We'll move on. So Vicky, how can managers balance supporting those who are struggling while keeping momentum with employees who embrace change a bit more quickly?
Yeah, I think that's really tricky, isn't it? Because the business is potentially going to want to go 100 miles an hour. You'll have some colleagues that want to go at that pace, and then you'll have some colleagues, as we said, will be different, maybe slower on their change journey. So for want of not wanting to repeat myself, I would it's definitely around recognising it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's got to be around tailoring the support, recognising your individuals, knowing your people is key with any management skill, but absolutely with change, knowing your people and knowing what matters the most to them. So I think, recognising the fact that people will adapt quickly and eager to move forward while others need more time. I think even having that in your mind when you're making changes and when you're on that journey is a great starting place to be. And I think it's about not pushing everyone to the same place at the same time, because it won't happen. It won't happen. And it's about acknowledging that, but sort of meeting people where they are. And I think if you have got those colleagues that are struggling, I suppose taking the time to offer reassurance, maybe you can never over communicate. I always think, you'll never get bad feedback for over communicating. So offer more communication, offering reassurance, and a safe space for them to tell you how it feels. If they're feeling nervous, I think give them the opportunity to voice those concerns. For those that are embracing it, and on the other end, how can they help influence the peers? How can they be your change champions and those voices? So I suppose encouraging those that are further along the change journey to help you offer reassurance to the others. I think managers, as we said before, are really key. So think about practical tools that you can give them, whether it's talking points, whether it's ideas around how to handle the resistance, whether it's talking to them about coaching skills and how to help people on there. And I suppose the reminding them of their role within all of this. As line managers, their role is keep the bigger picture in sight. Absolutely, where are we going at the end of this change journey, but also protecting the team and the team's well-being, and the fact that not everyone will be on the same journey at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Vicky. Actually, I mean, we're big advocates of business coaching. Myself and the managing director, we've both had business coaching and life coaching, and we tried to roll that across the senior managers as well. I think it's good for your staff to see that you want to get better at what you do, and then roll that out across the teams. We try and upskill all our staff all the time and offer them coaching, and it resonates a little bit back to what we talked about earlier about it's more of a soft skills approach as well. Yes, we've obviously got the qualifications that people need for certain areas of their job or even to progress on to other roles, but I do think soft skills play a massive element in it, because no one size fits all. Everybody, there's 4 of us talking today, and there's many people out there watching this webinar, but every one of us have got different wants and needs. And I think if you can recognize that in your organization and try and find a way to offer that to your teams, I think that's really quite, it's quite useful. And then also we've found that in times of change, people will be resistant because they feel under pressure. They maybe feel overworked or overwhelmed with the work, because not only are they having to do their day job, they're trying to navigate through this period of change, which is more difficult for some than others. But if you can adopt a cross-departmental working ethics, I think that's really useful as well. So we might say to people, oh, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm feeling really a bit under pressure because of this and that. So we'll say, well, shall I take this off you? And we'll see if so-and-so can help you with that. And just try and do a little bit of cross-department working and share the workload a little bit. It might not be forever, but if it helps somebody get through that period of change and they feel like they've been supported, the end result almost inevitably is positive, and that's speaking from experience, because that is how we've deployed things in our organization, and it really does work. And that also leads on to the agile working element again, because you might have a plan of action, and the plan of action might be great on paper, and you might be going along quite nicely, and you think, oh, hang on a minute, that's not really quite working. Or somebody might come to you in their one-to-one and say, I'm really not coping with this, can you help me? And that's when you think, oh, we're going to have to be a bit agile here. What can we do? And that's when you might bring somebody else. Can you help so-and-so? And so that's how it sort of naturally evolves. And they're what we call the curveballs, the curve again, Mark, that we talked about earlier. The curveball that you can't always foresee. It's great having a plan and having it on the broadsheet, but then in reality, it doesn't always work that way. So that's being agile and being able to change accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I think that agility now, if you look at a lot of traits which are now currently and have been for the last few years, or coming more onto the radar with regard to what we would like in changing times. Because let's face it, that this is more an issue now because of the sheer volume of change in a short space of time. The change curve is very steep. And I think the term agility and flexibility is the key skill here, to be able to adapt to new ways of doing things. We've always done it this way, our culture always does this. Is actually getting a bit old hat to the point that we can get left behind on the old. So we're talking a lot about curves today, but on the old sigmoid curve. For me, I think that agility comes by being adaptable, by opening up the skills that we actually do have within the organization. There's no doubt that there are people with different viewpoints. You know, I like the idea of saying, look, we're not all clubbed the same, we are different, we're affected by different things. But as you rightly suggest, and as Vicky said, you know, you'll have some people within the organization who can adapt and who work under pressure and can do it in a way that brings the system down so that the creative parts of the brain kick in. And let's face it, that's what we want during times of transition, are people to actually be creative in finding ways to move forward. I think trying to control and letting go of the things that we can't control are quite key here. And I know there are a number of models. I mean, I know Covey came up with the sort of circles of control model and one thing or another. The idea here is that there will be things that allow us to, I suppose, in a way, see our role within that change process. So, you know, is it me that I have to sort out and to do? And there's a point when a lot of people will be struggling and say, look, it's an inward focus. I need to focus on me, what I can do. But then there's a point when those people can have an influence on others, and that lead of if you like, change or transformation doesn't necessarily have to come from the top. It's pretty much going to be something to do with the overall team and how we understand the team's potential to influence and to, I suppose, in a way, focus our attention on the things that we should be doing. Now, if you've got this guiding coalition, which I mentioned earlier on, which is one of Cotter's ideas, the one thing that I really like here, and we haven't got time to go through it, but you know, there's the circles and influence thing, but I really like, and I, you know, Google him afterwards and have a look at Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek has got this idea of the early adopters and I suppose what would be the guiding majorities, and he actually calls it in a sort of slightly derogatory term, the laggards who will never go with the change. They'll never, you know, work with it. Let's not focus our attention on the people that actually are going to not come with it. They'll come with it eventually if the majority do, the sort of the silent majority who are they're optional to move forward. We don't want to focus on the people at the front of the queue who will love it as well, because in a way they'll be with you. There's actually a sort of a focus on his curve. And again, Simon Sinek, have a look at some of his stuff. I think in the circles and start with why is a great sort of TED lecture that a lot of people refer to when they look at this. Focus on those people where momentum, okay, will happen, where you get the most influence, and they'll come along and they'll bring it along with you. It shouldn't be a resistance from the people that won't come along, and we don't need to worry too much about the people who will. Where we focus our attention, it's the early majority, you know, it's the people who will come along and help us go through that tipping point. I suppose the old 80-20 rule works here, you know, the idea that, you know, 20% of the effort in the right place will produce 80% of the effect. If you've got people with you during times of change, and again, it's going back to all the models, but in practice it works, it'll be accepted, which is why I like to think that this sort of guiding coalition will allow people to sort of do it almost effortlessly to the point that we didn't even notice there was a change. It was, and again, you know, just before we sort of move on, you know, my idea is that this is a positive transformation. Maybe we should be dropping the term change because it has a negative connotation. Maybe we should be thinking about positive transformation because that's something to look forward to rather than something to resist. So yeah, it's getting people involved and creating that group, that core, if you like, of influence that will bring it with us, and then it becomes the norm. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I think there was some very good insights there, and particularly like how, you know, when there is change, you can identify where you belong, and that kind of help with the approach and where you fit in. So now we've got time to answer some of our audience questions. So I'll just start with the first one. So during times of change, I do have open conversations with the team, but I don't always have the answers to their questions. How would you suggest this is managed? And I do go away and try and find those answers, but in the meantime, I worry it leaves them feeling slightly anxious and apprehensive.
Look, we're not always going to have that answer, are we? Sorry, Vic. We're not going to have the answer always, but we're going to actually help people feel reassured that we're in it together. I don't know, that's my view. What are your thoughts, Vicky?
Yeah, I think I was going to say, whoever's asked that question, firstly, well done for having the open conversations, because we underestimate actually having the impact of having those open conversations. So, like, massive tick, you're doing a great job and keep doing that. And even if you haven't got all the answers, and you won't always have the answers, I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think it's a great sign of a great leader to be vulnerable and say, I haven't got all the answers, but I'm going to listen and I'm going to take it away. And I think what you're doing there is taking away and trying to find the answers. Yes, they will feel worried and slightly anxious, but we know going through change, some of the battle is just letting them have a voice of how they're feeling, and it sounds like having the open conversations. You're 80% there. So yes, they will feel slightly nervous and anxious, and I think as long as you go back to them and pick that back up, and even if you still haven't got the answer, reassuring them that I'm on it, I'm going to come back to you with it. That's what I think. But I think, you know, kudos there for having the open conversations to start with.
If I can come in on that as well, I mean, some of you may be aware of a technique called stemming. I think you could use a little bit of stemming here, where you could say to whoever it is that's asking you, saying, well, that's a really great question. Tell me more. What do you think about that? And then go away and say, do you know what? Leave it with me. I'll come back to you. So what you're doing there is you're obviously buying for a little bit of time, but you're not letting them feel like you're not in control. I think it's getting the balance right of listening to them, making them feel empowered because you have listened to them and you've really taken on board their questions, but you're still also guiding them and coming back to them. And it goes a little bit back to the you said we did that I mentioned earlier. You know, you're listening to your teams. It might be what they're asking you. It might be something that you've not even thought about yourself. You think, do you know what? That's a brilliant idea. So, but you're absolutely right, Mark. I agree with you. We're never going to have all the answers. And I often say to people as well, I joked only just earlier with somebody in the team. I said, every day is a school day. And you know what? I think that proves that we're all human. And yes, your staff do look to you for the answers. And of course they do. And they need leadership and guidance and everything else. But it just shows that you're human as a boss. And people will warm to you for that because they think, yeah, do you know what? They might not know all the answers, but they're real and they're human. And it puts them at ease, I think. That's just from experience. That's kind of how I would deal with that. But you're right, it's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So see, there's another really interesting question just come through about, you know, how do we support people who are neurodiverse, you know, in terms of the change process? And I think it's very relevant. With neurodiversity, and I know it's a very big, wide subject, but in general, the pattern making that neurodiverse people would like to have, the familiarity, the calm environment, is one that allows them to be their best. But look, one of the skills, and I know we're talking about a wide range of people, but in terms of the workplace, you know, there's an opportunity here to see new patterns, to see things in different ways, to use the senses to maybe open up lines of inquiry and to challenge some of the old ways we do things. So I certainly, if we're talking about 1 in 7 people being neurodiverse, then there's a significant number of people out there who have the option for us who are neurotypical to actually see fresh new ways of doing things and to see new patterns. I mean, we look at things like Ben Affleck, you know, in the film The Accountant. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but saw patterns that nobody else saw. What a fantastic asset. So I think this is an opportunity during change to open up the senses for fresh ways and include those who see the world differently in the decision-making process. So I think it's an opportunity. Look, I'm a positive psychologist here, so I'm going to always turn things around to the positive. But you know, the idea is that neurodiversity needn't be a problem for change. It's let's embrace it. Let's allow people to give their skills forward to seeing things in fresh ways. So I think it's a great opportunity. Under the inclusion and diversity and equality banner, we need to include everybody who's got some viewpoint which will be useful for us all. So I think it's a very valid question, and hopefully we can embrace those differences in a way that we all benefit.
Fantastic. Thank you for your views on that. I'll just ask another one here. So how can leaders encourage two-way communication rather than just top-down updates?
Okay, can I just, sorry, go on, Vicky.
You go, Mark. No, you go.
No, I think one of the things that to encourage the two-way communication, I think if we ask qualitative, you know, surveys and ask people for data, that's brilliant. But I think focus groups, I think gathering qualitative information where we ask the question, why? You know, the data suggests this. What does this mean? Why is it that? Why are people saying those things? And again, almost like a diagonal sort of cross-section across the organization of a representative focus group. And there's enough fantastic stuff out there to say how to set up a successful focus group, and it'll show you all the things that we've talked about, are going to allow, if you like, further in-depth feelings. And this is where the emotional intelligence comes in again. Communication's not, it's very superficial, isn't it, when we just talk about yeses and nos and data. When we talk about the feelings that people have towards things, it adds a depth which gives us a much better idea of what it means to people to change and to do different things. And we need that information. So, you know, for me, focus groups is a great way, and people will always want to say of how they feel. But, you know, we've got to make it a psychologically safe environment for them to do that. So psychological safety is important, and that's a cultural thing. Yeah.
Fantastic. I've just got another question here. So what might the signs be, or what signs might HR leaders or managers look out for that suggest change is taking a toll on well-being?
I think, you know, being a HR leader myself, I think, you know, there are some obvious signs that it's impacting people's well-being, but then there's also the less obvious. But I think obvious, you know, higher absenteeism, you know, more presenteeism, where people are sat behind the desk, but the output and the productivity isn't great. Knowing your people is key to this, because, you know, that might, doing a Zoom meeting and cameras being off could be a sign, but that might be how that individual always is anyway. So I think knowing your individuals and looking out for those individual signs of changes. Someone might be more quieter than normal, someone might be more vocal than normal. So I think, again, it's not everybody will do this. I think knowing your people and understanding they're not quite themselves today. And ask, be curious. Like we've just said, people have to talk. Ask them, how you don't see myself, everything okay? And I think that, you know, doing that in a very sensitive way, often people say, I'm either really nervous or I'm really worried, or so I think, looking out for those different signs, and different signs mean different things for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Vicky, there'll be physiological and psychological signs out there. You know, we'll see typically when people are under pressure, there will be a lack of energy, there will be, or a reduction in energy, there will be changes in habits. We'll see people's behaviors change. So on that basis, you might find someone who's normally happy-go-lucky, getting involved with things, to all of a sudden start to become more critical and even hypercritical and less social. And, you know, they don't always come out and say, hey, look, this is the problem I've got at the moment. We'll just notice these changing behaviors. We'll see changes in habits too. You know, people will start actually, as you say, you know, you'll not get the camera coming on more often, etc. And then we've got the typical sort of, you know, the terms that are used now. And you mentioned the sort of presenteeism, but, you know, got things like, you know, quiet quitting, you know, people who don't contribute anymore. And of course, the latest one we're seeing now is resenteeism, which is where people are resenting the things by digging their heels in even more with the things that they once accepted. So I think we'll see patterns of behaviors that are different, and there will be a physical and a psychological change that we should be actually helping them by starting that crucial conversation. And I think you're right, you know, asking people and then being in an open way to listen, and we will actually gather some good information. If we don't ask the question, we don't start the crucial conversation, things get swept under the carpet, and we start to see a change of it starts to be hidden when it comes to people's responses. It's not obvious. People will hide, and what we don't want is for people to be hiding in the wings and not making a contribution. So there's lots of signs and symptoms out there, but we've got to start that conversation again. All back to communication, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I just have a final question here. So how can peers support in times of uncertainty when you see colleagues are demotivated and frustrated with upcoming changes?
I'd come in on that and just say, I think if that this question and the previous question, if you're doing regular one-to-ones, whether you're doing them or your managers of the departments are doing them, you're in tune with your staff, and you just know. So you can, if you can see somebody's being demotivated, withdrawn, frustrated, you'll know by their body language. They don't even have to say anything. You'll just pick up on it. Grab them for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Let's have a chat. It can even be go outside in the smoke shelter, whatever it might be. Let's go for a coffee, even off the premises, and just talk about it. How are you doing? You know.
And I think that peer-to-peer support is crucial, actually. I think, you know, it's not just about line manager support, peer-to-peer support. People often share their most vulnerabilities with their peers. And I think You know, being a sounding board and a listening ear is the biggest thing that peers can do if they're noticing that their colleagues are feeling a bit demotivated and a bit frustrated. Listen, and you can always, you know, depending on the relationship, as a peer, you could say, do you want me to talk? Do you want me to raise that with somebody on your behalf? Do you want me to have that more formal conversation? So I think peers are crucial in this. Having great working relationships with your colleagues is crucial.
Thank you. Thank you for the perspectives on that. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But before we go, I've just got a final question for our speakers. So what's one piece of advice you want our audience to take away from this session?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first, Ali.
I'll go first. Just be agile and don't be frightened to share the vision of your journey through the change with your staff and your teams.
I think for me, it would be change is constant. It's going to happen whether we want it or not. How we lead people through the change really matters, and never, you know, communication is king. So yeah, that for me is a big thing.
Sure. Okay. Well, look, for me, you know, I've hinted to it, but you know, let's change the word change. If we see it as negative, we see it as something that's a hurdle to jump over. Let's delete change from our vocabulary and insert the word positive, or the words positive transformation. You know, it provides an opportunity for growth, both at a personal, a team, and an organizational level. Let's not get left on the old sigmoid curve. You know, every point of momentum on that curve can provide a gate of opportunity to move on to the next curve. So let's move on to the next curve and embrace change. Let's call it positive transformation instead.
Fantastic tips there. Thank you, guys. So brilliant advice from our panel, and thank you to everyone as well for taking the time to join, and to our panelists for sharing their expertise. Sorry if we didn't get to answer all your questions, but we will be doing some follow-up blogs on our website and try to cover some of the common topics on there. So please keep an eye out. And a survey will appear on your screen, as mentioned earlier. We'll really appreciate your feedback, and you will receive a recording of the webinar via email shortly after we finish. And finally, if you'd like to speak with our team about supporting wellbeing in your organization, please speak with our account manager if you have one, or you can email us at businessinquiries@westfieldhealth.com. And that will be the end of our webinar. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.